welcome back to another episode of Psychonaut Sessions, your home for all things psycho. And today I'm going to discuss the book SOULFORGE by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman. So SOULFORGE, let's see, when did it come out? You think I would have been better prepared? Looks like 1998 was the first printing. I actually have never read this before, even though I'm a huge Dragonlance fan. Especially a fan of Margaret Weis and usually her co-author Tracy Hickman, who only did the foreword here. SOULFORGE is actually a prequel to their acclaimed Chronicle series. So Dragonlance Chronicles, well, let's back up. Dragonlance was a Dungeons and Dragons module campaign setting created by Margaret Weis and Tracy Hickman and others from TSR as a campaign supplement to the Dungeons and Dragons role-playing game. Although I've played Dungeons and Dragons just casually with friends and whatnot, I've never been like a huge Dungeons and Dragons person. It's not like I own a bunch of books and figures and all that stuff. But I've played and I've enjoyed it. I never actually played in the Dragonlance campaign setting. I've never actually played in a specific campaign setting before. Oh, except one. I have for the Dark Sun campaign setting, which is actually a series of books that I think I might read next after this. But a friend of mine introduced me to the Dragonlance Chronicles series, which came out in the 80s, and it was incredible. So the Chronicles is a trilogy where basically when they created the Dragonlance campaign, they sat down and they role played the game, and that actual game they role played, they just took those characters and the game and they wrote a series of books off of them. And that's the Dragonlance Chronicles. It is literally one of my most favorite book series of all time. Out of any book or a series of books, I have reread the Dragonlance Chronicles more than any other, and I probably will continue to reread them until I die. I don't actually reread books much. There's very, very few that I reread. Chronicles, I will always reread. It's fun, it's engaging, it is adventurous. There's even heartbreak. It's just the whole gamut, and the whole crux of it that makes it so special is the characters. The characters are just incredible. The story itself is cool and it's awesome and it's fun. It's not like it's anything crazy amazing or something to write home about in the sense of like its originality. Its originality comes through its very unique characters and how alive they feel. In the Chronicles, I've never cried reading a book. I've cried reading Dragonlance Chronicles. There's also a sequel that takes place, a sequel trilogy called Legends. And Legends is based upon two of these characters from Chronicles out of all these other characters, out of the companions, we'll call them. These two characters are the twins, Raistlin and Caramon Megere. Megere? I'm going to say Megere. I'm horrible with pronunciations. And Raistlin is known for being like one of the coolest wizards in fantasy literature, I think, ever. And he has a very finite story. There's not like a ton of books on Raistlin and his journey with his twin brother, Caramon. But Raistlin was always a very interesting character. He's a sickly kind of wizard. He has golden skin. He has hourglass eyes. And so in his pupils are the shape of hourglasses. And it's because every time he always looks at someone, he basically sees their death. He watches them decay right in front of him, like always. This very tortured character who's just always sickly, and he needs his brother Caramon to take care of him, who's huge and strong, and he's like a warrior and really not that intelligent, but not dumb. He's just not as smart and cunning as Raistlin is. who ends up being one of the most powerful wizards in Dragonlance lore, and I would say in almost all fantasy literature. Their whole story from Chronicles all the way up through Legends is just an amazing saga, um, and very well written. Some people like Legends better than Chronicles. I think I like Chronicles better just because it has like all the characters. I enjoy Legends. I've read it a couple times. I'll probably likely read it again. I'm not as adamant about knowing I will reread Chronicles over and over and over and over again. um, but that is the finite story really of Raceland and Caramon and the rest of the companions is in those books. There are some other sequels that take place after that, like it's like the next generation of like the companions' children, and whatnot. Spoiler alert, maybe. You know, Raceland's. Well, I'll just say Raceland's story ends at the end of Legends, really. So if you want to find out what happens to like the next generations, you can read on, and there's some other books and stories. This is a prequel, and I think it kind of came through the popularity of Raceland. And Margaret Weis thought, like, well, I'm going to write the origin. I'm going to write the first years of Raceland. When Raceland became a wizard, there was the story of how he got initiated into the Conclave of Wizards. Well, not the Conclave itself, but just into his wizardhood, into being an adept. And there's this test that one takes in the Tower of High Sorcery. And Raceland and Caramon had always referred to it as this horrible, scarring experience that kind of caused Raceland's skin to turn gold, and he has the hourglass eyes, and that he's sick all the time, and barely has strength to go anywhere or do anything. And so Margaret Weis thought she would tell the story. Now, I'm not familiar with the campaign setting and the role playing stuff around that, but apparently there was a story called The Test of the Twins that took place in Dragon magazine, or Dragon or Dungeon magazine, which was a magazine that was all about like just the D&D campaign stuff, etc. And it basically told the story of the test, supposedly. And there's an excerpt, I think, in towards the end or whatnot, that in the beginning, that kind of says that this is kind of a rewrite of that. Like that was, and I think that story was reprinted in another Dragonlance book, like in an anthology. But that's not the actual. This is the one that like she rewrote that because she wrote it a long time ago, so she rewrote the story to make this canon. So this is Raceland's early years, the years of growing up in Solus, which is like one of the coolest towns ever of any fantasy setting. It's this town that lives up in the branches of these giant trees called Valenwood trees. That's the place that begins the Chronicles story. And we get the story of Raceland and Caramon growing up as young little boys. Like in my mind, for some reason, I was like, well, why not all the companions? Well, they're all different ages, and also some of the companions are dwarf or elf or kinder, and they all age differently. So I guess Raceland and Caramon were the only ones that were kind of like at that particular age. And there are other characters like Sturm Brightbraid, who's a brave warrior that they grow up with, but he's a little bit older. And then there's their sister Kitiara, who ends up she's actually like their kind of half sister of the same mother, but with a different father. And the story is that they're really not well to do when they're little. The mother is kind of a seer, but magic at this time is very a superstitious thing. Magic isn't well known, and wizards and magic and magical things aren't looked well upon. It's a very superstitious age. And also, this is like the Age of Peace. This happens before Chronicles, which is the War of the Lance saga. And there's this time of peace where the people of Ansalon, of the continent Ansalon, that they don't really, they had like settled war. That like they had war as a thing of the past, and it's kind of seen as this uh like I don't know, this like unsophisticated thing, um which is very interesting. So but anyway, Raceland's mother is kind of sickly herself. I think this is where he gets it. She is always seeing visions, and she's kind of usually paralyzed by some of these visions, sometimes for days at a time in bed. And it's a big thing in the family. They have to like take care of her and stuff. And again, she's not looked well upon in the community. The father he's just some kind of like woodworker. He cuts down trees and stuff, and he's just usually gone all the time. There really isn't much really covered in the father. Kiriara's father is apparently was this some sort of mercenary in the past that the mother still is kind of like obsessed with and in love with, and kind of makes me feel bad for Raceland and Caramon's father. But Kiriara is older, and she kind of drifts in and out. She's usually gone adventuring, and then she'll come back, and she's kind of mean and abusive. When she's around, they're kind of like on edge, and whenever she leaves, they're like, whew, taking a sigh of relief. But from the beginning, the very first part, there is a wizard named Asinus. Is it Asinus? I can't. Antimodes. Asinus is the scribe of the Dragonlance. He's like the kind of sort of a god who is the historian of the of this world. But Antimodes is a wizard who's kind of traveling around and looking for people to apprentice, and comes upon through going to Solus, comes upon Raceland, and is immediately attracted to him, and immediately sees that this kid has potential. He's not really doing magic, he's doing more tricks and whatnot, but there's definitely, like, he can tell that he has magical inclinations. And eventually goes to Parcilion, who's like the head mage of this era, and asks for him to be able to have Raceland go to school and get schooled in magic. And Antimodes is willing to, provide a scholarship for it. And Raceland starts going to school at a young age. Now, this was a little disappointing for me. This is one part of the story I didn't really like, because it ended up being this kind of like, he goes to this school and he's in class with all these other young boys who are learning magic by this like schoolmaster, and it was very like, even though I think it was kind of written before Harry Potter, but it has that Harry Potter-esque feel where I don't like that. I don't like this like, hey, we're all going to school together. And I think I always kind of imagined for magic users, it's kind of like a one-on-one apprenticeship sort of thing, or kind of like in this coven sort of thing. I don't like these sorts of like scenarios in any fiction where magic is just kind of seen of like, okay, you're going to school and here's your books and you come to class and here's your lesson plan, and just like, I don't like it. It's one of the reasons why I never liked Harry Potter. So, and I don't think anybody out there who likes Harry Potter, cool for you, awesome. I'm not talking crap on it. That's just like not my cup of tea with the way I like magic being portrayed in my fiction. So I automatically didn't really even like that. So as time grows, though, it is kind of cool to see Raceland's interaction with kids. He's always just kind of this sly, cunning, kid from the outset, scrawny, whereas his twin brother Caramon's big and whatnot. And the story kind of grows over time, where they eventually meet. They grow older. They meet Tanis, and who's the half elf of the group and kind of the leader. They meet Tasselhoff Burfoot and Why can't I remember the dwarf's name right now? Jeez, these are like my favorite characters ever. Um, and Sturm is kind of like a normal friend of theirs. So the group starts kind of forming when they get older. And one of the storyline threads is that kind of causes tragedy is while he's going to school and his brother is starting to work, there's this woman named the widow Judith who starts coming and taking care of the mother because the father's having to work all the time too. And the widow Judith is this very evangelical sort of woman. There's this new god called Balzar. I can't remember, but it's just this new god who apparently claims that they are the one god. And the widow Judith is this obvious like evangelical who's always preaching the word of this one god and thinks magic is evil and all this stuff and is like coercing the mother and like they're obviously manipulating the mother into believing in this one god. And there's a scene where the father dies in a logging accident and his body comes, they return his body and everybody's crying over it and it's this like horrible tragedy. And the widow Judith starts going off on like this guy is gonna burn in eternal torment kind of speech in front of everyone in the town and in front of the mother and the two boys, because he didn't give himself over to this new god. He wasn't saved, as it were. And Raceland stands up to her and is like, "Oh, you horrible person," you know. But that whole scenario, like widow Judith gets banned, and it kind of breaks the mother's heart even more. So her husband, and then now this widow who was taking care of her and was like her friend, like she loses them both, and she just goes like almost catatonic and is completely lost in vision, and then eventually dies as well. And that totally screws with Raceland, because he kind of felt this weird kinship with her because of like she was tapping into those realms of being a seer and magic. And so that's like the big tragedy that really like forms Raceland, as well as the one time when he starts trying to interact with a girl romantically. He thinks this girl's really interested in him and she kind of acts like she is, and he goes to meet her one night and then actually finds her with his brother Caramon, which he wasn't being mean. Caramon's just like, "Oh, a girl likes me, blah blah blah." He didn't really think that Raceland was going to be doing anything about it. But it's kind of a stake into Raceland where he's like, "I'm only going to dedicate myself to magic now," and also kind of explains some of his bitterness towards his brother. That why he's always so mean to his brother all the time. And that's the whole dynamic is Raceland kind of treats Caramon like crap and treats him like a slave, a manservant, and Caramon thinks Raceland can never do any wrong and is always there to help him no matter what, and adores his brother. So that dynamic is forged in this book. Things improve over time. He gets better and more adept at magic. He meets some other wizard where he gets some spell books. Eventually, there's this scene where they meet back up with the widow Judith because they find this like priest arena where the widow Judith is leading all these other priests and manipulating this particular town of their wealth. And Raceland casts this like major spell that is way beyond his capacity at that time, that exposes the group. But in the mix of all that, Kitiara kills the widow Judith. Raceland gets blamed for it, It's this big kind of like crazy thing, and it's kind of cool because we get to see all of the characters in Chronicles, the companions, start working together on an adventure for the first time, and how they're like interacting, which is kind of fun. Because they don't really quite trust all each other yet. They have these like dynamics that are just starting to clash. So that's a really really fun thing to go through. Um, my okay, so let me get into like Margaret Weis's writing. I love her writing. This book was really well written. Margaret Weis is an incredible writer. So is Tracy Hickman. I did see a difference between Weis and Hickman in this, where Weis definitely had a lot of room to really get into the characters and get into their feelings, and she did a really good job of it. She's an excellent storyteller. There wasn't a moment when I wasn't engaged or that I was bored and that I didn't enjoy the book. So kudos to Margaret Weis. On the plot, I had a pretty big disappointment overall with the whole book. And if you saw my review with the Deathgate cycle, I had this complaint about the Deathgate cycle as well, where it felt like the whole series was kind of wrapped up at the very last minute. And a lot of the times the books in the Deathgate cycle did that. There was like all this story, and then in the last like 40 pages, it gets wrapped up. And it's just so jarring. And the same thing happens here, because what you're looking forward to is like the test. You want to know what happens in the test that makes Raistlin who he is. And it doesn't start until like the last 40 some odd pages, and it's very quick. And not only is it quick, but the stuff that happens to him, why his skin turns gold, why he has the hourglass eyes, and why he has the staff of magus, it just bloop, all happens within like a single page. And that really bugged me. So major spoiler alert. If you don't want to know what happens, stop listening. So what happens is Raistlin, all the way up through Chronicles and then into Legends, has a tie-in and story with Fistandanthalus, who is like the most evil wizard of all time. And Raistlin's destiny is tied in with him through his whole saga to the very end. Raistlin ends up meeting Fistandanthalus in his test, like on the astral plane, because the test takes place in some kind of astral scenario that the wizards create. But Fistandanthalus evidently like got in there and like I guess was doing this with a lot of other initiates, and sometimes they would die because Fistandanthalus would kill them off. But he's basically like, hey, let me possess you, or let me latch on to you, so I can have a host body or whatever, so I can keep on living, because he was killed a long time ago, but his soul lives on. He's got this whole past. He's like the Voldemort of Dragonlance. And Raistlin is like, at this point, really still not even all that adept at magic, but agrees to it, and through that is able to beat the test through Fistandanthalus's power, and comes out of this like his magical prowess and power is amped up to the max because of that connection and that latching on with Fistandanthalus from the very beginning, which we don't really know about through Chronicles at all. And I did not like that, because that takes away from Raistlin and who he is and his power. That Raistlin himself was powerful enough. Apparently it was just like Fistandanthalus kind of amped him up and gave him this boost this whole time. His skin just kind of turned gold when Fistandanthalus possessed him. And apparently it was some kind of thing Fistandanthalus did to like protect his skin, so he got attacked, and all the magical power from that attack got bounced off of his skin. But that never happens in the rest of Chronicles or Legends. Not that I recall. Somebody please correct me if I'm wrong. And then the hourglass eyes are explained by this conversation that Parcelion and Antimodes have in the very end, where they're like, yeah, so we know that Fistandanthelus possessed him, even though they're afraid of Fistandanthelus, and they've been killing initiates that get possessed by him. But they let Raistlin live for some reason, and they're like, well, I gave him the hourglass eyes, and the so that forever he just everybody he sees dies, to humble him, to keep him humble, and maybe that will help. And I'm like, what? Like, Parcelion is a white-robed wizard, so he's all for good. He's like all about benevolence and doing good things. And in order to help this kid who was possessed by Fistandanthelus, he gives him this like spell or this curse of hourglass eyes, so that everything and everybody he looks at decays and whittles away into eternal death right before him all the time, forever, perpetually, 24 hours a day. And that's supposed to help him not sway to the evil of Fistandanthelus' side. That doesn't make any fucking sense. I don't understand that at all. And then gives him the Staff of Magus to just make up for it. He literally just, so I give him the Staff of Magus to make up for it. But I'm not going to tell him how it works. So he has to learn how it works. And that's it. And then Raistlin and Caramon leave the tower, and apparently they adventure for a couple more years before the companions meet back up again, because they all agreed to leave for a 5-year stint to go look for the old signs of the old gods, and then return to Solus in 5 years. But it was just kind of like, okay, so that's why he has the gold skin real quick. That's why he has the hourglass eyes and the Staff of Magus all real quick. Boop, there you go, everybody. There's your Raistlin, and like that you know and love in like even just like 5 pages. Which I just was like, what? I wasn't really even that impressed with the test. It was just some kind of astral scenario where he was in this like plane that looked like this. It was like an illusion where he thought he was in the real world, and he was approached by some mercenaries to rob a friend of his, and it was to test to see whether he was good or bad or neutral. And so he became neutral, so because he has the red robes. But that was like kind of it. That was the test. It was just like, what? Like, that's the test of what? Like, I was expecting something way more cosmic, some kind of weird initiation kind of thing. Was not very impressed by it. So I'm sorry, Margaret Weis. I love you, and I'll always read everything that you write. I completely adore your works, but I did not like that. The final 40 pages of this. Loved the rest of the book, enjoyed it, but highly disappointed with that final part and piece. But anyway, that's my review of the SOULFORGE. I do recommend reading it for anybody who's interested in Raistlin. If you just need more Dragonlance stuff to read, definitely read it. But if you're fine with kind of like the mystery of Raistlin's past, I mean, it's not like it's necessary to read, and it kind of just adds some elements that I think take away from who Raistlin is. So it was fun. It was fun to be back in that world again, because I love the Dragonlance realm and those books. But I don't know if I'll probably reread it. I enjoyed it at the time, but I think that's about all I have to say about it. Anyway, let me know what you think. If you've read it before, if you've read any other Dragonlance, would love to talk about it. Please like, subscribe, hit the bell for notifications. I have a Patreon you can sign up to, as well as my own books and comics you can purchase. I would appreciate the support, ladies and gentlemen. Have a great rest of your day. Keep it safe out there, and keep it psycho.